my journey through the world, over land and over sea, I see different cultures and different people's ways. I was born where the sun never sets and never rises. I was born where the heat is like a second skin. Children crying on the streets, automobiles are making noise, the land is growing dry and weak, spirits dying low. Before fathers are calling me, and never tired, never weak in the pride in me.
Thank you everyone for joining us on this third edition of the Green Room, and thank you, Professor Osundare, for joining us. My name is Tosin Bugi. And I'm an assistant professor of English and Africana Studies at Marquette University. It gives me great pleasure to be moderating this conversation on the intersection between poetry and environmental sustainability, with particular focus on Niyi Osundare's poetry. Indeed, this event could not have been more timely, given the particularly challenging times we now live in. Besides the many consequences of environmental degradation that we have seen in recent years, we have now a new virus in town, which goes by the name COVID-19. And sometimes I'm wondering whether this is COVID-19 or this is COVID-20, all kinds of names. Although small and invisible to the human eye, this virus takes the world as its theater, and on its stages its tragedy of epic proportions. As the scale of its human disaster rises and the denials of its real magnitude continue, we are reminded that although humans are on this planet, they are not the planet. Indeed, we are not the planet. On this earth are other beings, other elements, other forces, all of which have their own destinies, their own spirit, their own aspirations, as well as anger. They have their own eleda, or call it chi. They have their own chi, they have their own eleda. Provoked, they react, often beyond our imagination and to our consternation. But who wouldn't? After all, as the Yoruba say, that is only a bastard refuses to be angry in the face of provocation. We're extremely lucky to have as our guest today the doyen of African literature, Niyi Osundaре. Niyi Osundaре is the author of 18 books of poetry, 2 books of selected poems, 4 plays, a book of essays, and several monographs, academic papers, and features articles on literature, language, culture, and politics. His eco-literary criticism and activism, and his eco-poetic activism, now in its 4th decade, has been the subject of several scholarly writings and wide international attention. Drawing inspiration from many African cultures, Osundare's eco-poetic writings center both the human and non-human dimensions of our earth, especially in ways that show their codependence and intertwined fate. In his poetry, therefore, the moon does not only have its own song, but also its own madness. Water does not only retain its memory of human wrongs, but also retaliates. And the earth does not only possess potent laughter, but also potent anger. This is, of course, a non-hierarchical universe of relations in which humans trigger or can trigger nature's buzz, as we like to say these days on social media. Osundare's poetry is shot through with a stubborn kind of hope. which is best framed by such poems as Our Earth Will Not Die and This City Will Not Die. This program is put together by the Green Institute under the directorship of Dr. Adenike Akinshemolu. Located in Ondo Town in Nigeria, this institute has been at the center of many conversations around environmental sustainability in Nigeria in recent years. I am deeply grateful to the staff of this institute for all their brilliant work and advocacy and for hosting this conversation. I'm also deeply grateful to Professor Osundare for honoring this invitation despite his many commitments. As I yield the screen now to Professor Osundare, please remember to send in your live comments and questions or greetings for the poet as we continue with the conversation. Please join me in welcoming our guest to this conversation.
Thank you very much, Tosin, for that characteristically ebullient introduction. I was actually going to say, let me go back home. It appears you have said everything. But one or two things. Thank you, Tosin, and thank you, Dr. Akinshemolu, for the initiative that I have seen all around, the work you've been doing over there in Ondo. Our country doesn't always have a healthy reputation around the world, but it is important and it's really heartening to see this kind of initiative coming from Nigeria and coming from Ondo too. I will be, what I'll be doing will be a kind of themed performance, themed presentation, because the moderator, Tosin, has had my work neatly cut out for me. So our point of meeting and our point of departure will be Earth. All the poems I'll be reading will be centered on our Earth or really closely related to it. Now, this is a topic that has engaged my creative energies, my creative imagination since I started writing, why Earth is so important. And I have not just the poems, but also my comments and essays in different books, the latest of them being Caliban, published by the University of Toulouse in France. This was about 2 years ago when they had a conference on lands, furrows, and sorrows in Anglophone countries. What this whole huge book is about is the relationship between nature, the environment, literature, and other arts. I was privileged to have been invited to present the keynote address, in which I actually looked at the pen as a digging instrument, pen. And so we have this here, and there is also another one from my old university, University of Leeds in England, Moving Worlds. This is a journal, and this entire volume is dedicated to our Earth and nature, with emphasis on the reckless use of nature, of the abuse of the environment, and the repercussions. But the emphasis here is on catastrophes and the environment. And there is this, ISLE, co-founded and co-edited by a friend of mine, Professor Scott Scovish, here in the US, Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and the Environment. I have had some contribution to this too. This is just to let you know that this is, call it functional poetry or poetry in situ, with a kind of vision. I'm happy that we're doing a lot about the environment and trying to rescue the earth on which we live. Now, my presentation, I found it difficult really trying to selecting the kind of poems to read, but I've more or less tried to orchestrate this like some kind of symphony, since it is themed. There will be 6 parts. The first part will be dealing with poems relating to Oriki Ile, that is praise name of the earth or for the earth. The ravages, kind of plunder done to the earth. The next is consequences. And then earth warriors, or members of the Salvation Army of the earth and the environment. 1 or 2 poems about that. Then admonitions, 1 or 2 words about what's been happening. And the last one will be a kind of coda, or what I call conclusion. That will be at the end of the program. The preamble, often people call me farmer-born, peasant bred. That is something I imposed upon myself because I think those are the first few words of The Eye of the Earth book. I completed writing in 1985, was published that year, I think. This is important, my background. My father was a farmer. I grew up, it was when I got to the university that I found people talking about middle class, upper middle class, and so on and so forth. We were peasants, we were farmers, and we respected the earth because we knew that our whole being depended on it. My father used to tell me, you should be able to talk to a tree and hear the tree talk back to you. The kind of background I had reminded me then and still reminds me of my experiences with indigenous peoples of the world. Beginning from here in the United States, the Native Americans that we often have forgotten now. Their land has been taken over, plundered in one way or another, and nobody seems to know, nobody seems to remember that before all these huge things we have around here, some people inhabited this continent before the coming of Europeans. Then we go to Australia and New Zealand, the Maori. From there to the Pacific, Papua New Guinea, and so on, and then Africa. Indigenous people and the respect they show to the earth. No difference between my experiences reading about these peoples and the experiences I had as a boy growing up in the rainforest area of Nigeria. And what the immediate trigger for the Eye of the Earth in the early 80s was the damage that I saw happening to that rainforest of my youth. Native Americans have a saying that I think should be globally credited to them and then globally accepted and used. And they say this: we did not inherit this earth from our children, from our ancestors. We did not inherit this earth from our ancestors. We borrowed it from our children. Tejeje, tejeje, that is, step gingerly upon the earth. So, part 1, Oriki Ile, still part of the tejeje. This little book of poems, I remember the last paragraph in the short preface I did for it, which I completed in November 1985. 1985, yeah. Waters are dying, forests are falling. A desert epidemic stalks a world where the rich and ruthless squander earth's wealth on the invention of increasingly accomplished weapons of death, while millions of people perish daily from avoidable hunger. Tomorrow bids us tread softly, wisely, justly, lest we trample the eye of the earth. So, earth, Ile. Why shouldn't I start with a song that I used to hear when I was young in Ikere-Ekiti, the western part of Nigeria? Ijogun jode o, alale loba isa. Ijo te alele o, alale loba isa. Alale, alale loba isa. Temporary basement and lasting roof, first clay coiners, and the last alluvial joy. Bread basket and compost bed. Rocks and rivers, muds and mountains. Silence of the twilight sea, echoes of the noon sun tide. Milk of mellowing moon, fire of tropical hearth. Spouse of the roving sky, virgin of 1,000 offsprings. Ogere amokoyeri, 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 ogere amokoyeri, alale loba isa, ijo te alele o, alale loba isa, alale. Still on our earth, and it's Oriki. The second poem is taken from Days, one of my books of poetry. Days of, those of us who know something about Yoruba cosmology and culture, but won't find it difficult to apprehend. Every day of the week is a character. With its panoply of activities and a lot of consciousness around the days. So this book is about days. And talking about days, we also have to talk about Earth Day, that day dedicated to our remembrance and celebrations and preservation of the Earth by the United Nations. That is April 22nd every year. It is celebrated in a short poem in Days. Ayajo, let me see, page 96. April 22nd. And this is to be accompanied with music of the earth in any language of the world. Music that represents the rhythm and the lyric of the spheres. Every day is Earth, and Earth is every day's. But this day is the day of the bell and the gong, of solemn awakenings and the hurt which comes before the herb. Wounded trees bleed in the forest, lynched lakes congeal like rancid potions. Poisoned sea foams at the edge of 1,000 mouths. Who dare forget the day the river caught fire and the mountain lay crushed like a mound of hapless cake? Yellow rains, crimson dew, broiling winters, freezing summers, a perforated sky leaks red tears into the basin of thinning rivers. A tropical madness unclothes the streets. Newborn babies surprise the cradle with double heads. A heartless science has sowed the wind. Oh, see how we reap the storm. Where are the silk-petaled flowers, birds with feathers of paradise, air clean like the breath of a mountain spring, dust which speaks the language of the human skin? This day insists that we restore the frog to its pond, the dew to its grass, man to his mind, earth to its future. Those are just representative of so many poems I have about our earth. Now, things have not always gone that way. So we have ravages, that is the plunder that our earth has been through, especially through the power of the so-called science. People say it is science, people say it is progress. But when you see the way our environment is being used, you know that it is neither scientific, nor is it progressive. Because I studied Latin. Science comes from the Latin word scientia. Scientia means knowledge. If you use the earth with knowledge, then you wouldn't have the kind of ecocide that we're having now. Ravages. This section is dominated by my Amazon story. That's my recent experience when the Amazon forest the whole region went on fire a couple of months ago. And President Emmanuel the president of France was the first person to say, Macron, Professor Macron, President Macron said, the lungs of our planet are on fire. The lungs. That is a very powerful metaphor. The lungs of our planet are on fire. So a section here deals with trees. What do they do for us? Now, I think what better way to start than to read just a few lines of a poem I have written in Yoruba. Well, it's Yoruba, English on first, but we are pressed for time, so I just read a few portions to you in Yoruba. Those who understand Yoruba, please hear me and understand me at the same time. Those who do not should enjoy the sound and yes, take this in good faith. The title is Igida, and I owe the initiative here to great indigenous Yoruba poets, Akewi we call them, Túbọ̀sún Ọládàpọ̀, Láríwájú Adépọ̀jù, Akínwùmí Ìṣọ̀lá, Adébáyọ̀ Fálétí, and so many others, who, in their own words, have shown us the beauty that comes from the lips of Yoruba speakers. Igida, Atótó arére ìjàmbá bàbá fìtínà. Ẹ wá gbọ́ o, ẹ̀yin mùtúmùwà. Ẹ jẹ́ ká finú konú, ká ṣàpérò ọ̀rọ̀. Ẹ jẹ́ ká sọ̀kò ọ̀rọ̀ sáwọn aláàáké wòbìà. Agétò ní márotọ̀lá, asọ̀gbẹ́daṣálẹ̀, asọlẹ̀ olómi dìlú òǹgbẹ. Ẹ jẹ́ ká wo òkè, ká wo ojú ọjọ́, ká bi sánmọ̀ léèrè pé níbo lòòrùn wà. Igi ń tán nínú igbó, àgbọ̀nyìn rọ̀bọ̀tọ́ ti di nǹkan àwárí lókè ọ̀dàn. Ìrókò rọ̀gbọ̀dọ̀ àfi gíga fíofío ṣẹ̀ṣọ́, níbo lo wà? Àràbàrí bí onígbòǹgbò rìgìjì ràgàjà, níbo lo rè? Ọ̀gàn owó tó ganwọ́ gansẹ̀ lókè oko àbùṣọrọ̀, níbo nìwọ rè? Igi ọ̀mọ̀ tó fún wa nílẹ̀kùn ọlà, níbo lo gbé dúró? Gbágà, igi ti wó, ẹyẹ ti fò lọ. Talking about trees and Yoruba. Now let's go to the Amazon. There's a book I'm working on, which is the sequel to The Eye of the Earth. I thought I had completed it until the Amazon started burning. And I said, no, I had to do something about a couple of poems about this. So there is a whole body of poems forming a movement in that book. I'm reading one or two poems from there. Amazon burning. And again, President Macron, the lungs of the planet are on fire. So in the background, there'll be music of a kind of threnodic type, somber, but not hopeless. No. Act 1. Whose spark provoked the fire? People of the world, can you see the fire raging like a sweeping dragon on the roof of our planet? Dwellers of our precious earth, can you hear the desolate threnody of wailing leaves in the inferno of the forests? The Amazon is burning. The lungs of our planet are seared in smokes. Do not ask me whose spark fathered this fire. Do not ask whose greed provoked the blaze. Do not ask whose blindness averted our gaze from these incendiary graves. We have sowed the cinder these several seasons. Here now comes the darkness of our doom. The Amazon is burning. The lungs of our planet are seared in smokes. Tell it to the emperors who fiddle in their golden palaces while this earth burns and bleeds in countless places. Ever seen how they stumble on the clearest signs? Sorcery trumps science. A haughty superstition drowns the voice of genuine reason. They who know nothing have become the masters of everything. The Amazon is burning. The lungs of our planet are seared in smokes. And that is there. In this section of the book, you have trees really talking as human beings. Yes, they are beings too. And if you listen very well, you will not only hear, you will understand their language. I have so many trees talking that I'm going to just give us the voice of one of them. It's called kapok, K-A-P-O-K, in the Amazon. Now, I had to do some bit of research while working on this. The Amazon in Brazil, in Peru, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, then up to Malaysia, Indonesia, and back to our Africa, Congo, and of course our western part of West Africa and the rainforest area of Africa. The trees are like brothers and sisters. It's really amazing. Oh, so here is kapok. Kapok is, I think, the cousin, the Amazon cousin of Iroko. My name is Kapok, giant of the Amazon. They call me father of the animals, and they have never been wrong. Squirrels race up and down my back. Their tails are stirred from my gentle breath. Monkeys come in their restless dozens. Those restless gymnasts of forbidden heights. The sloth, too lazy to climb, sometimes grunts its cheers from the humble patch 300 years old and still growing. My father saw many more moons, as also did my mother. My brood has long mastered the art of putting death beyond our gaze. I tower above the earth in my reach towards the sky, taming the sun's frightening fire in the basin of my leaves. Season after season, storms have come and gone, some wild and furious with murder in their howl, but buttressed and hard as iron. I know how to tame the wind, the folds and folds of platform, which roots have learned to have become the caves and castles for troubled birds and beasts. Farmer, doctor, fortress, and spirit of the world, I root the rain and direct the desert. I am that plug in the hole of the sky. I am a vital lobe of the lung of the planet. That is Kapok telling us, in case we do not know. And the trees talk back too. They are not just passive recipients of the human being's mindless plunder. They try to tell us, yeah, here we are. They even talk satirically at times because themselves, why are human beings doing this to us? Look at their axe, their big machetes, their chainsaw saws. One of the trees then tells them, don't you know what human beings do to one another? Then you shouldn't be surprised what they do to us. Trees. Yeah, trees talk, but it takes more than an ordinary intelligence and sensitivity to hear and understand their language. So all the trees at the end of that movement sing this song. We bleed when cut. We bleed when cut. We are the trees of the Amazon. We are the trees of the world. We laugh, we cry, we whisper, we shout. We breed, we brood, we breathe, we help to breathe. We carry the planet in our careful hands, a tender burden, historic mission, the loom and latch of a naked world. We robe the earth in our green embrace. Hour by hour by hour, we lose our skin to waste, to war, and the senseless blaze. The careless axe, the haughty chainsaw, and the cannibal greed of the rich and strong. The spider monkey and the spectacled bear, the butterflies and the forest crabs, the eloquent parrot, the sagacious owl, the cool canopy, and the traveling roots. A tree never falls alone in the forest. A tree never falls alone. It takes our future with the crashing leaves. The blind gold digger, the reckless farmer, subject your greed to the need of all. We are the trees of the Amazon. We are the trees of the world. Pearls from the past, flowers of the future. We burn when ignited. We bleed when cut. We are the vital lobe of the lungs of the planet. Those are the trees talking, and of course, we know the forests, the rainforests of the world, I think control well over 70% of our oxygen. Well, scientists say so, and I think it's reasonable too. So forests are also healers. And they're just in case we human beings don't know, they're telling us. Now, we have not been listening. And because we've not been listening, there are consequences. there are a couple of poems I have here from interdisciplinary studies in literature and the environment. The book edited by my friend Slovich. One of them is titled The Desert Cometh. That's from A Bird's Eye View. So I was in an airplane someday, and I cast my my gaze down through the oval windows, looking at the Sahara. And I saw that there was a time by the time you had finished flying over the Sahara, you will fly for about an hour or two or so over green vegetation. Now the green vegetation is disappearing. The rainforest from the air is like an eyebrow now on the head of the Sahara. The desert cometh. The desert marches towards the coast, dust-faced, fire-footed. A millennial fury in its gaze, a swath of scorpions in its hands. The sky, bare and frightening, the only cloud there is a caravan of particles and intimations of coming plagues, wilted wheat and punctual tubers. The Sahel unleashes its hell. The trees are in sad retreat. Between desert and ocean, a narrow strip of trembling green. There is a fire hole in the sky. Earth is nothing more than a cauldron of dry dreams. And this one, because we are pressed for time, I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's titled Drying Lake. If you were around the Lake Chad about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, go back there now and see what the lake is shrinking and the water is drying. All the lake elements are dying. The whole place is stinking because fish is rotting, toads, and so on. One of the largest lakes in Africa is drying up before our very eyes. So the ignorant and callous politicians who say that climate change is a hoax. Who say that climate change is a hoax are a dangerous hoax themselves. Climate change is real and dangerously real for that matter. So the dying lake, that is a poem here for Lake Chad. And then there's another one, Head in the Sand. Those are people who say that climate change is just a hoax. They're like that ostrich with the head in the sand. And because we know that it is very, very real. And yes, let's go on to Earth Warriors. With all this happening, are all human beings folding their hands and just watching? No. As often happens, there are human beings who think about the future. And there are many of them, thank goodness. There are powerful opponents. Those ones will not inherit the future. One of them has a name, that's what I call them, members of the Salvation Army of the Earth, the Nigerian environmentalist and writer, and a good friend of mine who was hanged by the Nigerian government, not just killed, hanged by the Nigerian government on November 10, 1995. I think, yeah, that was the government of the maximum ruler of Nigeria then, President, did he call himself president? Military dictator Sani Abacha. Those of us who often say art has nothing to do with politics should really see what is happening in our world. And then they know whether a tree should live or not, whether the ice in the Arctic to continue to melt with the ocean swelling and coastal towns being swallowed up, whether we should allow this to continue depends upon who has power, political power. And this is where we are all involved and we are all engaged with it. Ken Saro-Wiwa, that's the person to whom this poem is dedicated. It's a song. I saw Ken Saro-Wiwa shortly before he was killed. He had a copy of his book on this darkling plain. Yes, and it was a Sunday morning, I think. He brought me a copy at my home on the campus of the University of Ibadan. I never knew that would be the last person I was going to see him. Short man, usually asked, "Can you see me?" Humorous, a brilliant, extremely active, and very fine writer. He died because he said the expoliation, the devastation of Ogoniland, and I would say the riverine area, delta area of Nigeria, where the oil is coming from, that this exploitation should stop. I think the oil companies saw to that in collusion with the military dictators of Nigeria. So Ken Saro-Wiwa is not dead. Remembering Ken Saro-Wiwa, I saw Ken Saro-Wiwa the other night, short and sharp, like an angry song. So many years, still no respite. The rot so rife, the despots so strong. The oil tycoons still pollute the land like a bunch of braggarts, untouchable band. Our days still dark, our nights are flare. Our lives are ruled by fright and fear. The creeks are blocked, the rivers are choked, the fish are dead, the crops are gone. The same old fire satanically stoked, the same oil men with their greedy gun. They drill and still they drill a prostrate earth, their mighty thrill. They spare no thought for coming years. Our trampled land, its wears and tears. The delta's black gold, our yellow peril, our plundered land and corrupted home. They scoop their billions without a sweat. The polluted people are the rusted chrome. The story, their ken, is still the same, except in places it's grossly worse. The delta's door shakes in its feeble frame. The rust too strong for my humble verse. The other warrior, I think I'm moving towards the end now. The other warrior is not Nigerian. And because she's not Nigerian, she's also of the world. And the young lady whose momentum and initiative have shaken the world, Greta is her name, Thunberg, the Swedish teenager who is shaking the conscience of the world. I have been following her, but this poem is the immediate trigger is her address to the United Nations a couple of months ago when she asked them, "How dare you? Tágbà ṣe bí ọmọdé, ọmọdé a máa ṣe bí àgbà. How dare you?" she asked. The riveting thunder of a question rattled the roof of a sleepy world. In her belly, a compelling volcano urgent with fearless fire. In her mouth, the tongue of sage and seer. Listen to the tree, respect the river, tame that greed which consumes our world. Give our earth a chance to live. How dare you? She asked. From pole to pole, that thunder nettled powerful naysayers who lost every sense of the reason behind her rage. Its impatient indignation, its roaring redemptive reproach. How dare you? She asked. The women of Greenham Common nodded in grateful remembrance. Our universe rocks to the rhythm of her courage. The future sways to the vastness of her vision. How dare you? She asked. Yes, final one before, I think person said the closing part, that's the last poem, will be read when the conversation, at the end of the conversation. Just two short poems, one which people are familiar with, because it's been on the reading list in Nigeria for a long, long time. Ours to plow, not to plunder. That's from the eye of the earth. Ours to plow, not to plunder. Ours to plow, not to plunder. The earth is ours to plow and plant. The hoe is her barber, the dibble her dimple. Out with mattocks and machetes. Bring calabash trays and rocking baskets. Let the sweat which swells the earth's throat relieve heavy heaps of their tuberous burdens. Let wheat fields raise their breadsome songs to the ripening sun. Let legumes clothe the naked bosom of shivering mounds. Let the pawpaw swell and swing its terrible breasts. Let water spring from earth's unfathomed fountain. Let gold rush from her deep, unseeable mines. Hitch up a ladder to the dodging sky. Let's put a sun in every night. Our earth is an unopened greenhouse, a bustling burn in some far, uncharted jungle, a distant gem in a rough, unhappy dust. This earth is ours to work, not to waste. Ours to man, not to maim. This earth is ours to plow, not to plunder. I think that will be it for now. The affirmative last poem, I think I will reserve until the end of our discussion. I have monopolized this platform long enough. Now I yield my place.
Thank you very, very much for that. I don't think it's reading, I think it's performance, right? So thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think we'll start the conversation now, and I would like to open the conversation with a question on place and childhood. And by these, I mean that, you, of course, grew up in Ikere-Ekiti, and we find these in your poetry. I remember that I traveled through that place, I think 2016, sometimes 2016, and I was looking for the rocks. Which one is Olosunta? Which one is,
They saw you.
Really good one. And so, and in the eye of the earth, for example, one finds references to Ubo Abushoro, to Eniju, to Ogbeseodo and Okeroku. We also see, like you just said, and we hear Olosunta, we see and hear Orole, and we hear Ishidale. My question then is this: how did the career of your childhood, or the Nigeria of your childhood, shape the way you think about the earth and the writings that you do for, your eco-poetic activism?
I often say that the happiest years of my life were the ones, let's say, between the year I was born, 1947, and 1966, when Nigeria experienced her first coup d'etat, particularly 1960 to 1966. Our head stood conveniently on our necks at this time. There were problems, quite all right, we know, but somehow there was more sanity. And after that, things began to really fall apart. I have seen a little bit of the world, and I can compare cultures. And I would say that African culture is extremely strong, and Yoruba is part of it. There is a depth to Yoruba culture, to Yoruba language, and relationships with other cultures and other languages in the country and on the continent and our planet. For example, every season had its own organization, its own activities, and dedicated to them. Planting season and the kind of songs that went with planting. My father was a farmer. I grew up on the farm. An Arawoko, if we want to put it that way, a very proud Arawoko indeed. And then our religion was respecting indigenous religion. One of the problems, one of the causes of our crisis in Africa today, I think, is the takeover of our indigenous selves by Islam and Christianity. Yoruba culture, Yoruba cosmology are really rooted in this plus that kind of philosophy. That is, add this to it. But when these religions came, no, it's a way, replace this. Now, that has caused a lot of problem. All the artworks, because in Africa, culture and religion closely bound. The artists had something to do with religion. Each of the Orisha had her or his been thrown out because they were called idols. And there were idols in Catholic churches. Those idols were civilized. African idols were thrown out. So that's where we began to lose it. Respect for the forest disappeared. As I saw in one of the invitations to this program, there were sacred forests in those days. Ibudu had things for that. I mean, the forest has its own, in fact, something I'm researching now, the forest, what it actually meant. The forest was a city of its own. Trees had their own identity. So I grew up with all the songs, Egungun Festival, Osanyi Festival, of course, the one worshipped in my family, and the one that does the family name. Less, so all these things contributed to the way I saw the world. I have never encountered anything more poetic than those things. So when you talk about poetry, you don't need to go out You are surrounded by it. It's naming ceremony, outdoor ceremony, marriage ceremony, they were all there. Take another look at Wole Soyinka's works, another look at Chinua Achebe's works. Look at we will know what I mean. A lot of what we do, we owe to our culture and to our environment. Of course, without diminishing the impact of what has come from abroad. Important again, this and that, not this instead of that. Me luluwawi, as the Yoruba say. The sky is wide enough for 1,000 birds to fly without clashing, unless some of them are unnecessarily greedy. It is not elimination by substitution. I think I'm stronger because I have added Western ways of doing things, Asian ways of doing things, and so on, to my own Yoruba way of doing them. Now I have to substitute what's coming from outside for the degree of knowing and being enriched by. So that is the poetry of it. It is in our backyard. It is in our bedroom. It's in the kitchen. It's in the song we sing to welcome the new moon. It's the song we sing when we see a beautiful flower. So ask Shakespeare, and he will tell you what the Elizabethan world did for him.
Thank you very much for that response. In your recent you moved towards a new kind of aesthetic that you called differential aesthetics. And I was thinking, because in that paper you were talking about art and politics and how Western understanding of aesthetics would mean that you don't combine both. A kind of theme that you also find in the selected poems, the 2002 selected poems. So this kind of material that you put in your poetry, people, I think some critics can say this is essentialism. How do you balance that? How do you respond to that?
Thank you very, very, very much. Yes, differential aesthetics. Yeah, this is an idea. It's not just a theory, it's a principle that rules my enterprise, and even my creative consciousness. Differential. A Chinese poet writes differently from an American poet. An Indian poet writes differently from an Australian poet. They are all writing poetry, but from different cultural and social and political and psychological backgrounds. Yes, Chairman Mawich was who said, "Let 1,000 flowers bloom." But what I see with many of the so-called critics and theorists, especially in the Western part of the world, is let my flower bloom and take over the whole field. You to concoct one little theory in some little village in France or some little village in America and say, voila, now I have a theory that covers all literature written everywhere, every time in the world. That is egregious ignorance. It's this first cousin of stupidity. No. Critics, African writers have always had these problems with critics, especially Western critics. Schooled in the tradition of Aristotle, Longinus, and so on and so forth. Those, of course, are great writers. Those are great theories. Those are great thinkers. I'm happy that I know them and I know their works. But that doesn't mean that when Plato was talking about his diary or he was thinking about my ancestor in Africa. No, there are correspondences. I mean, look at ancient Hebrew culture and ancient Yoruba culture. Similarities, because we are human beings. So problems arise when you impose your own theoretical and aesthetic judgments on what's coming from other places. Just one example, and I stand to be corrected. Yoruba doesn't have and doesn't rely on any rhyming pattern, which must come terminally in the poem. A, B, C, D, C, D, and so on. I remember some people say, oh, now, if a poem doesn't have A, B, C, then it's not a poem. It's not. Who told you that? What about what I call systemic rhythmicality? Yoruba is music. Igbo is music. Edo, Urobo. Have you ever heard an Urobo singer with drums? Music is African. Go to the Congo, the heart of Africa. They are doing music, they are doing poetry. Which Bach or Beethoven or Wagner could not have really captured them. They could have appreciated those forms of music. These different types are different aesthetically and emotionally from theirs. So I'm saying that, yes, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Yeah, write your own poetry, do all this, but have enough intelligence, have enough humility to know that not everybody in the world should create a poem or should do the sculpture or should do the painting that will match your own expectations and your own prejudices. Yes, differential aesthetics. In Yoruba, you don't say mo fẹ́ ka ewì, mo fẹ́ kéwì. I want to chant poetry. I want to sing poetry. I want to perform poetry. This is a very important aspect of what I call This is a very important aspect of what I call systemic rhythmicality, the music in it. How do we really handle it?
Thank you very, very much for that wonderful response. We have some video in the green room. I will want to bring one of them in because we have questions coming in. So I also want to take a lot of the questions from the audience. I can take some of the questions coming in. Please drop your comments on the screen and we'll take them as we go. I think we still have some time to play around with. So I would like to bring in Dr. Chigbo Yanduba, who is an assistant professor of English at the University of Winnipeg.
Thank you very much, Tosin, and thank you, Professor Osundare. I particularly want to thank you for the incredible work you have been doing, especially for the arts. Some of your poems that I have been privileged to read inspired me a lot. So quickly, regarding the subject of poetry and the environment. I thought that one of the of your poems have done for me is to connect me much more to the world that I live in, especially to the so-called natural environment or natural world. And even when some of these poems are maybe mourning humans' devastation of the environment, or cautioning against the ruination of the earth, or prophesying doom against human violence to the natural world, I still, manage to feel that sense of being clothed with an awareness or an ethical consciousness, about the environment. And I found it very fascinating the way you yourself classified your work today into 4 movements, from paying homage to the earth, to mourning the violence done to the earth, and then to kind of the earth retaliation, or the consequences, as you put it, of human violence on the earth, and then to admonition. I'm still expecting the last poem that you withheld, but I
You
have
to pay for it.
2 broad questions. I have 2 broad questions. The first question is it concerns the general matter about writing and environmentalism, and we know that the people responsible, especially for the destruction of the earth, are not usually the ones who suffer the consequences, at least the immediate consequences at the moment, right? The Niger Delta in Nigeria, to distill it specifically, the victims of the despoliation going on there are the ones who perhaps suffer from earth retaliation, right? So my question is, why does earth not discriminate in its retaliation? Why do victims of the kinds of capitalist destruction of the environment still are represented as victims when earth retaliates? Your Katrina poems are an example in this regard, right? And my second question is a more general one. In all the years that you've been writing, I think over 40, 50 years now, you've been writing all these cautionary works, cautioning against environmental pollution in Nigeria and in other parts of the world. At the same time, the more you seem to write, the more intensified the human violence against the world has been. I remember the roads have become worse, and we harvest more corpses from at least Nigerian roads. More trees have been murdered, and the Iroko trees of my childhood that were the wonders of my childhood, they've all disappeared now. I grew up in Anambra State. Right. So in all these years, you still continue to write and lament these outcomes. How could your lines, your poems, still carry beautiful melodies and metaphors that inspire fancy and some form of musical pleasure in the face of this continuous destruction that we witness, right? What kept you going in all these years? Why did you think, what did you think changed or gave you an inkling of a difference to make you unwavering in your continued advocacy for environmental justice?
Thank you very much, Dr. Anyaduba. Really appreciate it. It's a pity we are pressed for time. The questions you have asked and also your comments could inspire a whole book. And I really appreciate this. Let me, why does Earth not discriminate in its wrath? Yes, because nature is ruled by its own logic. It's like the question I ask all the time. When I see the wickedness that is being visited on people all over the world, and the kind of really astonishing sufferings that we go through, occasionally you ask, how can God allow this to happen to his children? Where they say his, I would say his or her children. That question we ask all the time, but at the same time, people say, when the sky says, I'm going to fall, that is not the responsibility of only one person. In fact, you haven't finished. The irony, terrible irony about this is those who despoliate the earth, those who plunder the earth, are in a position, because of the wealth they have acquired, the loot they have scooped, they are in a position to protect themselves against the ravages and against the consequences. So these are the illogicalities we are facing. It's usually the homeless and the poor people who suffer. I must tell you that I have no answer to that, because Katrina nearly killed my wife and me here. Everything we had, everything was destroyed. I don't think we are the two most terrible sinners in the world. So what we should be doing is asking questions. Why should a few people do this and put the rest of us in jeopardy? It is important for us to talk. It is important for us to walk. That's what that 16-year-old Swedish girl is asking us to do. No, we are not going to allow you to do this to us. Finally, one or two sentences about, yes, been doing this for so long. I remember one of my discussions with Chinua Achebe, must have been about 3 years before he died. We talked about this too. I was teaching the novelist as teacher in Hopes and Impediments. And so I asked him, Prof, what about, and he laughed. He said, well, we've been doing it for so long. What are we going to do? We cannot stop. And there is a saying, as long as there are lice, L-I-C-E, in the hems of your garment, there must be blood stains on your fingernails. We have those fingernails, so we have to keep at it. Resilience, this is it. In fact, one of the poems I was going to read, but because I was pressed for time, is titled Stubborn Hope. And I have stolen that phrase from Dennis Brutus, the great anti-apartheid South African poet. That's the title of, I think, one of his collections. Stubborn hope. Yes, our hope has to be stubborn. There is no giving up. Because we didn't inherit this earth from our ancestors. We borrowed it from our children. Thank you. Greetings to all.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Ayaduba. So we have some comments coming in. I would like to take the first comment that I have here, which is from Professor Adeleke Adiako. Thank you for joining us, sir. His question has to do, I will just read out the question. How do you manage loyalty to the earth? As someone sympathetic to the farm, Oko, and the water that might erode it, that is, how do you manage loyalty to the earth and as well as the water that might erode it? After all, you're a partisan of Osun. I think that's the first question.
Oh yeah. Osun is also part of the earth. That's the liquid spirit. Yeah, the liquid fluid. Water is what we are talking about. There can be no river without water. That's it. I don't see any contradiction at all, but I see what you mean. As I tried to hint in Katrina poems, water has a double. In fact, I have the shortest on it called the water poetry and the ambivalence of water. If you don't believe this, ask Alakpandagi. That's the Yoruba word for tilapia. Alakpandagi, when you see Alakpandagi, swimming in the lake, it is so graceful and so on. And the next moment, when you see Alakpandagi in the kitchen, in a bottle, in a bucket of water, it is the same water. So too late, Alakpandagi saw the ambivalence of water. One of the interesting things about nature is its ambivalence. And I think this is why nature features very, very much in literature, particularly tragedy. I look at classical tragedy or the kind of stories that we have in Africa. It is the same teeth the dog uses for caressing its young that it can use to bite it when it wants to correct it. It's this complexity is important. So earth and water, ocean and Ile. I hope you know that water has borrowed its bed, that trough, from the land. I think the two know how to treat each other. But the river is, the course of the river is analog for the span of human life. Very, very young when it takes its root from a mountain, usually, then fairly young when it's in middle course, and then slow when it's about to enter a lake or the sea. That is why it is the land that controls it, but it also has a way of establishing its own. When water wants a way, it also always knows how to make the earth path. It's like a ecolo. You wonder how the earthworm, without a hand, without anything, manages to carve its trough, to carve its holes, even through the hardest earth.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that response. We are going towards the end of the program now, so we have 1 minute for and I would like to bring in another person here with us in the room, and that is the person of Tolu Odebumi. Tolu Odebumi is a doctoral candidate in the rhetoric, theory, and culture program at University.
Good evening, sir. And
hello, Tolu.
Nice to see you after a long time.
Yes, a long time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, still here in Toulouse, though. Yeah, so my question, first of all, I'm happy to be a part of this program, and it's nice to hear of your continuous activism. But I was really wondering, because we've talked about how you've been writing for over 4 decades now, and I'm wondering, I know your personal experience with Katrina, about your friend Ken Saro-Wiwa, because I also do a little bit of climate change stuff. I do a little bit of climate change rhetoric, so I'm very familiar with what goes on in the Niger Delta, Ogoniland, and all that. But I'm wondering, what was the turning point for you? So it is true that you've always been writing, you have that stubborn hope, but was there a turning point in your activism for the climate? Did something happen that really shook you, that probably changed the way you write, or it just shook something in you that was different from, your experience in the over 40 years you've been writing, and, you've had this connection with the earth, and you feel, I must do this, because I know now there is a lot of activism, social movement, but yours has been like before social media and all of that. So I'm just wondering, in all of this, so you've seen different stages and different things happen in the last, over 40 years. So I'm just wondering if there was something that happened that changed, your reaction and your writing and something like that.
Thank you very much, Tolu. Good to see you again. Very, very briefly, I would say that it has always been there in my subconscious. From what I said earlier on, my upbringing and so on. The forest, the river, the festivals, people, interconnectedness. All these things were there. They were there, residual, as it were, almost passive. I talking about turning point. I think that must have been when I came back from Canada, 1979, and I went home, and I discovered that most of the trees very near my father's farm had been cut down, and the birds had disappeared. I have always been very close to nature, the way I write and so on. But that was when I began to say, oh my God, somebody has to do something about this. This was actually when the conception of the eye of the earth began. So I had to go home a couple of times to really soak myself in the rainforest. That's from Ibadan to Ikerekiti. Now, when you came back, by the time you came back to Ikerekiti, to Ibadan, University of Ibadan, you discovered that you had lost the instantaneity of it. I remember going to the Botanical Garden University of Ibadan one very, very early morning with the dew still falling. That was how forest echoes began. First moved in the dew was falling on me. I would call it participant observation. Was there. So and I was asking, how can we really survive without no gun? I have money. I don't wood any but depend and do something too. No, this is it. Throughout my writing, nature has been there. I gave a lecture at the University of Ibadan about a year ago, why every writer should be a climate warrior. We need nature. I have never seen any great writing that hasn't depended one way or another on nature, one part of it or another. What will happen to poetry when all the trees in the world have disappeared, when all the water is polluted? So it is even in our own interest to preserve nature, not only that, to defend it.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming on the program. All right, we have another question from Dr. Nathan Sitzma. Thank you very much again for joining us today. And the question is, how do you understand the distinctive contribution of poets or other writers as compared with activists or policymakers when it comes to climate crisis? How do you understand the distinctive contribution of poets as or other writers as compared with activists or policymakers? And I think it's on the screen. The question is on the screen now. When it comes to climate crisis,
distinctive contribution of poets or other writers as compared with activists or policymakers when it comes to climate crisis. Distinctive contribution. Well, if I understand this very well, Nathan, thank you for this. I don't see, first, there shouldn't be any contradiction because it depends upon who these policymakers are. There are policymakers who, out of their ignorance or greed or whatever, or callousness or lack of empathy, will tell you that climate change does not exist. They are policymakers too. But writers are not that, well, not all of them. I can't speak for all of them. Most of the writers I know are not likely to join those policymakers. What I'm looking forward to, and I think it's happening one way or another, is a situation in which writers, sculptors, painters, musicians, and so on achieve a kind of synergy in their effort with what policymakers, right-thinking, progressive policymakers are doing. And I don't think it is impossible, not at all. President Macron of France was the first to say, oh, the lungs of the planet are burning, are on fire when those terrible fires broke out in the Amazon. And the president of France is a policymaker, no doubt. It is the coming together of these two groups that I think I'm looking for, and it should be possible for our world to achieve this, because those groups need some resolution to this for our own survival.
Thank you very much for that response again. There is a question here from, I don't know the person, but Olanike Valero. I hope I'm pronouncing surname very well. So the question is, in the poem "Water Never Forgets" in "City Without People," why did you present nature as a violated woman, seething for revenge?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. Most of the time, I can't speak for all Yoruba people or for all cultures. Water is always perceived in feminine terms. In Ikere, that place in Ikere where I was born, Oduoja, Ile-Asha, Osun is not far from the family house, and it crosses the way to my father's farm. So we are surrounded by Osun. Osun is worshipped for 7 days every year. And it is women's festival. They designed the kind of drum, they fashioned out the women should be beaten. They composed the songs, and the chief priestess, of course, is a woman. Those 7 days, men look in from the periphery. So it's and the name for Oshobo is called Yaloshun. In Ikere, it's Yaloshun too, but it's also called Eyekaire. Eyekaire means the mother we pet, the mother we respect. So I've always seen water, maybe because of its fluidity, the softness, of a symbol for also justice, because when water is angry and it breaks into a flood, then you see the power of its anger. So the feminine principle is there. For when it comes to the god of iron, it's Ogun. Ogun is unrepentantly masculine. You can ask Wale Soyinka.
All right. Thank you very much again, for that response. We are moving towards the end of the conversation. I think we're going a little beyond the time, but maybe we'll just do it for a few more minutes and then we round it off. There's another person with me in the studio today, which is Gabriel Bangboshe. He's a doctoral candidate in the comparative literature program at Rogers University. And he also would have, I think, a quick question for you on your poetry and its relationship to eco-critical activism. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Prof. So I want to say thank you for giving us the miracle of the world and hear food from one of your poems filled with the plenitude of the earth, irrespective of its constant destruction. Because of time, I'm just going to ask one quick question. Many questions have been asked today, but my question is actually tied to my appreciation of your work. I'm intrigued by how much with care you combine what I would like to call the ecology of the world with the ecology of the earth. So I wonder what motivates this ethics of care, or what I would like to call ecological literacy. And it is tied to the second question as well. And maybe I would like to say, maybe this is the question for me of eco-futurity. An echo as ecology, and echo as in sound. So I would just like to ask, do you see, maybe it is also tied to the question of the contribution of poets to the problem of climate crisis and policymakers, vice versa. But I'm going to tie that question to the question of eco-futurity. Do you see the future of the world in the earth and the future of the earth in the world? So both questions on ecology of the world and the ecology of the earth. What prompted and what futurity do you see in that, for me, wonderful combination? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful combination. You've called it, yes. And it should be a kind of cooperative cooperation too, because they are in a kind of symbiotic relationship with each other. Where would the world be without ecological justice? Where would the earth be without ecological? Actually, the word earth and world are often used interchangeably, depending upon what existential plane you are in. Yeah, I hope you remember that famous Yoruba name, Ayelangbe. Ayelangbe. That we live in this world, but we also live on this earth. It is so that is the way I see the relationship between the two. The earth is our home, as I said in the eye of the earth. That is temporary basement. That is when we are all strong and we are walking all over. It's the basement beneath our feet, and lasting roof. When we are dead and we are 6 feet under, the earth is on top of us, is our roof, So the two really go together, the way I see it. I like your poem, echo, ECO, ECO. I think one echoes the other two, ecofuturism. There is a lot of future for this because the future of what we're talking about is tied up with the future of humanity. The way things are going, if we are not careful, we're going to disappear. In fact, some towns are already disappearing in Indonesia. I think 1 or 2 islands are being abandoned, right in the middle of the ocean because the ocean is rising. When Katrina did its havoc to us, I remember the first email I received from Professor Wole Soyinka, still remember now, at last when people knew where we were, because for about a week, nobody knew we were going from one evacuation place to another. And he said, Niyi, Ayonbo, that is, congratulations on surviving this terrible havoc. And he said, just yesterday, I was driving past, what is it called now? Ahmadu Bello Way, Victoria Island. And I looked to the right and I said, my God, it's just a matter of time before we have our own Katrina. Ahmadu Bello Way, which we borrowed from the Atlantic Ocean. But you see that many of the buildings have been just a slight bit of rainfall. The ocean is there. Many of the houses have been buffeted. So the future is in our hands, and I think fear is driving most of the reasonable. Unfortunately, power is in the hands of extremely unreasonable and ignorant people in the world. People who only think about their bank account, who don't know that you have to be alive to spend money, But there are also others who are saying, no, this earth is our home. We have to defend it. So our future depends on it, on this earth that we live in. The Eye of the Earth is the title of this book. The one I'm working on now, almost complete, takes the dialogue to the sky, that hole in the sky, which is getting wider and wider every day. If Earth is our home, how can we continue to live on it and in it? What about our children?
Thank you again very, very much. So, we bring in the last person that was bringing in the director of the Green Institute, in the person of Dr. Adenike Akishimolu. She will come on the screen.
Oh. Ah.
Hi, Professor Niyi. How you doing, sir?
Hello. Nice to see you at last.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for coming. Thank you for. We're so glad that you're here. I just wanted to. I'm not asking a question. I just wanted to make comments because one of the quotes that struck me was when you said that when the sky says I'm going to fall, that is not the responsibility of only one person. And I think you were making reference to the Hurricane Katrina. I wanted to add that when I was a student, I think 200 level, I was one of the people that volunteered to with the Clinton Global Initiative to go to the regions that were affected in those days and try to help them build and clean. We were just able to come do just little to contribute our own effort towards the Hurricane Katrina. So that kind of kind of got me when you talked about how it affected your family and yeah. So I just feel like individually we can all do something for our environment, no matter how it is. And I think that's what your poetry is doing, because your poetry is very exploratory of nature. I think remarkable is an understatement. Especially what you said about the trees. Like, if I can remember, the trees are talking. That is resounding. That speaks to me, because the trees are the primary producers of the earth, and without plants, especially, there's no food, right? There's no oxygen, fresh air for us, processor, photosynthesis, and all that. So I love your poetry. That's what I want to say. I want to thank you so much for joining us at the Green Institute. It's been a pleasure. It's an honor, big honor. And I look forward to having conversations with you beyond the green room. I look forward to mentorship. I look forward to just listening to you, speak the words of nature to us, to remind us of what we need to do, that we don't need to wait for the government, that we are the change that we seek our community. And that the process should start now. The actions should start. So thank you so much.
I should be the one thanking you for this great initiative. As I said the other time, when I was going in a room, oh my God, this is coming from Nigeria. It's coming from Ondo. It makes a lot of difference. Yes, the world won't change unless we change it. I believe, and the point you've made, really rhymes in very well with what is happening all over the world now, because our world is going through some kind of reappraisal, about the vertical arrangement of power, the racial disadvantagement of some people, and so on and so forth. The eco issue also falls squarely within this orbit. So thank you for this initiative. Just a very interesting episode. Tosi and I were talking about a village called Inyafaworogi shortly before this program began. And I said, I used to drive. I love driving from Ibadan to Ikere-Ekiti, and of course, you have to pass through from Ife, between Ife and Akure. It's an agrarian society, the village, big yams and so on. And there is the name of the village there called Inyafaworogi. That's one of the names and villages that inspire one of the poems in The Eye of the Earth. So it's a way of linking your initiative with what is happening naturally around the Ondo area there. Please be strong and give my regard to all your staff.
Yes.
I know what it means to initiate this kind of project from Nigeria with all the logistical issues. You know, the future is here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The future is here. Yeah, definitely. I agree with you, sir. And we'll keep telling the stories. We'll keep sharing your stories and putting them in. So you share the story, we'll put them into action.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, sir.
Cornelia and you.
Thank you again. We have one more question. After this question, Prof, you read the very last poem, and then we are making a wrap. And the question is from...
When will your last question be your last question?
I mean, and I have to say this, we can't take all the questions. So what we will do will be to organize the questions, and maybe I will send them, email them.
No problem.
At least you have all the questions. I mean, there are a lot of questions coming in, and I'm grateful for all the people sending them, but we can't take everything, obviously. This question is from Dr. James Yeko. It said, "Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Your free verse poem, Not My Business, went viral online, partly because it spoke to the Nigerian moment. How do we continue to mobilize the literary to check power?
How do we continue to mobilize the
literary? And I think the question is on the screen now. To check power.
To check. Oh, yes. Hello, James. How are you? Yes. I was actually going to say that coming from James is a kind of rhetorical question, because he's been doing it since I knew him at the University of Ibadan. Yes. And I think you and I must have raised that issue with Chola Lomiyomi around 1 or 2 times. But now, for the benefit of the public, depends upon what we really want to do with literature. This ties in with the point Tosin was making the other time about this thing I'm working on called differential aesthetics. That's why it's usually difficult to erect some kind of universal rule for literature all over the world. The form and shape, let's take a poem. The form and shape that a poem takes depend upon the function that poem is performing, and the function depends upon the origin of that poem. If I were a well-fed, well-protected Western poet, maybe I wouldn't need to write a poem about hunger. Fine, it's not your fault, but please have enough imaginative sympathy to know that not everybody has your own kind of comfort. And that in Yoruba, they say, "Ebi npa mi kò ṣeé fìfé wí." I am starving cannot be said in a whisper. There are certain times you have to shout for the world to hear. The world always pretends to be deaf. And you have to make sure that the world hears what it is. There is a certain kind of aesthetics that deals with that too. There is also a certain kind of aesthetics that deals with nuance. I know nuance. I'm a literary scholar. Nuance, the thing you say in Yoruba, of course, Yoruba is full of this. You say it without appearing to have said it. There are certain things you do that way. But there are also other things you have to really say so that nobody can say, "Oh, didn't hear it." I think it was Sartre in his book on literature, who said the role of the writer is to perform his or her duty in such a way that After reading, after this, nobody can say, "Oh, I never knew" or "I never heard." And I think this has been the function of literature all along. I have been watching certain things on television, on my screen, and enjoying them in the past 1 week or so. I think they call it foundation. These are satirical songs based on current American happenings. The most popular of them is "Vote Him Away," and I say this is satire, in the real sense of the word. The Romans practiced it. The British practiced it. In America, we are practicing it too. When I'm about to sit down and write an essay on a poem or on a work, the first thing what is the purpose? And as a student of stylistics, I also know that your analysis will be futile if you don't match context with text. Many people, because we live in the era of textualities and so on, which is an abuse of posturalism. Text without context. So when we talk about textuality, we also have to talk about contextuality. We also have to talk about contextuality. For this thing to be full, for our analysis to be round and really full. So yes, we make literature. This is what has always happened in African literature. Our writers have always addressed take all Wole Soyinka has been through. What about Chinua Achebe? What about Kensaro Wiwa? Kensaro Wiwa was not killed because he committed a crime. His works and the way he was trying to arouse consciousness contributed to that. The sacrifice we have to make. Military status in Nigeria didn't just say, "Oh, I'm now tired, I want to go." No, the soldiers were driven away by many of the poems many people were doing, and that was at the time I took poetry to the newspapers. There are certain aspects of change you achieve through nuance and through whispers. There are others you have to achieve by shouting. There is the aesthetics of shouting too. I'm not saying that all poems, unemployment, all poems, no. You have to put art there, quite all right. Make it speak to the feelings of the people, to the heart of the people before it goes to their head and so on. But people write differently because they live differently, because they feel differently, because they are deprivileged differently, and I want to put it really down because of the color of their skin too. From what we are seeing in the world today, you stopped and frisked so many times, it is likely to come out in the kind of works that you do. No. So I think I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you very much. So I want to thank everyone who taking time to join us. I think it's afternoon here, but evening in Nigeria, in different parts of the world. Thank you very much. Thank you for creating time to make this conversation very lively. Thank you for sending your questions. And I want to thank Professor Osundare very much for creating time to have this very important conversation and for accepting to do this reading. So he will read the last poem for the night, and then we make it a wrap. Thank you.
With all that has been happening, I thought you had forgotten that. Well, it should be about a minute and a half. Well, the closing, what I call the coda. It's the last poem in The Eye of the Earth. Actually, supposed to be performed with musical accompaniment. Our Earth will not die. Ọdẹ roko ọdẹ pẹran kété, ibi àríwá kété, àìsàn àríwá kété, àṣẹ. Our earth will not die. Lynched the lakes, slaughtered the seas, mauled the mountains, but our earth will not die. Here, there, everywhere, a lake is killed by the arsenic urine from the bladder of profit factories. The poisoned stream staggers down the hills, puffing chaos in the sickly sea. The wailing whale, belly up like a frying fish, crests the chilling swan songs of parting waters. But our earth will not die. Who lynched the lakes? Who slaughtered the sea? Whoever mauled the mountains? Whoever, our earth will not die. And the rain falls acid on Baltimore forests, their branches amputated by the septic daggers of tinted clouds. Weeping willows drip mercury tears in the eye of sobbing terrains. A nuclear sun rises like a funeral ball, reducing men and meadow to dust and death. But our earth will not die. Fishes have died in the waters. Fishes, birds have died in the trees. Birds, rabbits have died in their burrows. Rabbits, but our earth will not die. Our earth will see again, eyes washed by a new rain. The western sun will rise again, resplendent like a new coin. The wind unwound will play its tune, trees twittering, grasses dancing. Hillsides will rock with blooming harvests, the plains batting their eyes of grass and grace. The sea will drink its heart's content when a jubilant thunder flings open the sky gate and the new rain tumbles down in drums of joy. Our earth will see again. This earth, our earth.
Thank you very much. Very, very, very powerful. And so this is the end of the program. We are very grateful to everyone who joined us for this reading and conversation on the intersection between poetry and environmental sustainability. Everywhere you go in your individual lives, please be kind to the earth. Thank you.
Sure.
sóko, mo bólú oko, ó ní ìwà kẹ̀ṣù, ọ̀rọ̀ èṣù kọ́ ló ń dùn mí. Mo lọ sódò, mo bólú wẹ̀rẹ̀, ó ní ìwà kẹjà, ọ̀rọ̀ ẹja kọ́ ló ń dùn mí. Mo dénú gbó, mo bólú ọdẹ sọ̀rọ̀, ó ní ìwà kẹjù, ọ̀rọ̀ ẹ̀dù kọ́ ló ń dùn mí. Mo dé búkà, àwọn ọ̀rẹ́ mi ń bùtà, wọ́n ní ìwà òkèlè, ọ̀rọ̀ ebi kọ́ ló ń dùn mí. Mo rí ìyá bẹ́tẹ̀, ìgbà ńlá ní tèmi, wọ́n ní ìwà mòkúrọ̀, ọ̀rọ̀ ẹmu kọ́ ló ń ṣe mí. Mo wá délé, mo bá Rónkẹ́ mi sọ̀rọ̀ o, ó ní ìwà wúrà, ọ̀rọ̀ ara kọ́ ló ń ṣe mí. Olùfẹ́ ní gàgà, kí ló dé tó dorí kodò? Nígbà kó nígbà lò, ọ̀rọ̀ gbogbo ayé ló ń dùn mí. Mo ní bó bá o pa o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Bó bá o kù ú lẹ́sẹ̀, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Bó bá ní lọ́wọ́, ká bá ẹ jẹ́ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Bó sì ní mọ́, ká kẹsẹ̀ sọ̀rọ̀, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Oníwà tó dáadáa, ká bá ẹ jẹ́ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Bíwà ẹ ò sì dá, ká yẹra fún ẹ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Oníṣẹ́ tó dáa, ká gbà mọ́ ẹ lọ́wọ́ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Bó o sì rí ṣe, ká fi ẹ́ ṣe yẹ̀yẹ́ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Oníyàwó tó dáa, ká bá ẹ fẹ́ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Bíyàwó ẹ ò sì dá, káyé mú sí ẹ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Ènìyàn bí àparò, lọ́mọ aráyé ń fẹ́ o. Ènìyàn bí àparò, lọ́mọ aráyé ń fẹ́. Ènìyàn bí àparò, lọ́mọ aráyé ń fẹ́ o. Ènìyàn bí àparò, lọ́mọ aráyé ń fẹ́. Lọ́mọ aráyé o, tó bá ní lọ́wọ́, ká bá ẹ jẹ́ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Bó sì ní mọ́, ká fẹsẹ̀ sọ̀rọ̀, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Oníwà tó dáa, ká bá ẹ jẹ́ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Bíwà ẹ ò sì dá, ká yẹra fún ẹ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Oníṣẹ́ tó dáa, ká gbà mọ́ ẹ lọ́wọ́ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Bó o sì rí ṣe, ká fi ẹ́ ṣe yẹ̀yẹ́ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Oníyàwó tó dáa, ká bá ẹ fẹ́ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Bíyàwó ẹ ò sì dáa, káyé mú sí ẹ o, lọ́mọ aráyé o. Bága ènìyàn bí àparò, lọ́mọ aráyé ń fẹ́ o. Ènìyàn bí àparò, lọ́mọ aráyé ń fẹ́. Ènìyàn bí àparò lọ́mọ aráyé ń fẹ́ òye. Ènìyàn bí àparò lọ́mọ aráyé ń fẹ́.